I just finished 6 videos that read and reacted to Paige Williams' article, Kyle Rittenhouse, American Vigilante. A lot of people got completely hoodwinked by the article, thinking that it offered a fair and balanced treatment of the Kenosha shootings. In this video, I will focus on her choice of Joan Donovan, a rabble-rousing scholar, as she describes herself, on the subject of right-wing terrorist media. Hello out there. I am trying to get through.
With his powerful brainwaves cradled in the warmth of reasoning, it's time for Johnnie Walker Dread to straighten you out on a thing or two. Emanating all the way from exciting Las Vegas, Oklahoma, it's the Johnnie Walker Dread Show.
Okay, so here is the paragraph where Joan Donovan enters the picture. It starts, right-wing news outlets package the fieriest images as evidence of ruinous policies in Democratic-run cities and criticize the mainstream media's refusal to acknowledge the violence. Joan Donovan, the chief of research at Harvard's Shorenstein Center, identified One America News Network, Glenn Beck on Blaze TV, and Fox News, particularly the hosts Tucker Carlson and Sean Hannity, as promulgators of riot porn. Writing in MIT Technology Review, Donovan said that such footage, designed to overwhelm the sense-making capacity of viewers, inspired militias and vigilantes to live out fantasies of taking justice into their own hands. Okay, we're going to read this article by Joan Donovan. A lot of you guys never picked on the links. You got to select the links and read what's going on here, and you'll understand where Paige Williams comes from. Again, this whole article was designed to be projected as balanced and unbiased. This was supposed to be a fair treatment of how Kyle Rittenhouse has been treated. But if you click on the links, you'll see exactly where Paige Williams is coming from. Let's go ahead. This is an opinion article, How an Overload of Riot Porn is Driving Conflict in the Streets. And we'll focus on Joan Donovan in a bit. We'll talk a little bit more about her background. But right now, let's just read this article. Weak organization forced right-wing agitators to rely on video and social media. Oh my God, they're relying on video and social media to get their messages out. They're the only ones that do that. Now they have a machine to spread a narrative of lawless rioting. And it's not hard to understand where Joan Donovan's coming from the very first sentence that she bold-faced. Let's read this. When Kyle Rittenhouse shot and murdered protesters in Kenosha, Wisconsin, it wasn't just the act of a lone vigilante. It was a direct consequence of white militia groups' organizing on social media. Okay, so first of all, she already has him pegged for murder. He hasn't been tried yet. Innocent until proven guilty? No, you don't understand. The left doesn't believe in that. As far as they're concerned, he's guilty. It doesn't matter what's on video. It doesn't matter that he was attacked first, chased. He's guilty. And in her mind, I doubt she would even want him to have a trial. Just throw him in jail because he's right-wing. Also, it wasn't just the act of a lone vigilante. He was not a vigilante. I've gone through this many times. A vigilante is one who assumes the powers of local law enforcement or some sort of government agency without the authority to do so. Kyle did none of that. He went there and protected property. Police do not protect property. That is the role of a security guard. A security guard is not law enforcement. He did not act in the role of a judge, and he didn't act in the role of a jury. People say, well, he shot somebody. He didn't go out, seek Joseph Rosenbaum and decide, Joseph Rosenbaum, you are guilty of a crime. I'm going to shoot you. That didn't happen. Joseph Rosenbaum attacked him. Now, whether or not you believe that Kyle acted in self-defense or not, clearly, Kyle did not act as a vigilante in that example. He didn't go out seeking Joseph Rosenbaum because he felt that JoJo had violated some crimes or anything. And of course, the same can be said for the other people he shot. They were chasing him. Also, it was a direct consequence of white militia groups' organizing on social media. So basically, she's got him pegged as a white supremacist, and even if she doesn't want to come out and say so, it's guilt by association. All right. Since June, right-wing media makers have recorded and circulated videos of violent altercations at protests in cities including New York, Boston, blah, blah, blah. And keep in mind, left-wing media outlets have also done the same thing when they're reporting on Proud Boys and Boogaloo Boys and all their violence, but she doesn't mind that. That's not a problem for her. Fed into a media ecosystem with an established bias towards highlighting violence and rioting, the videos have mobilized white militia and vigilante groups to take up arms against Black Lives Matter and Antifa protesters. Gee, is this kind of like taking videos of police shooting people and then organizing protests? And of course, you end up with the riots, right? How is that different? This feedback circuit has created a self-fulfilling cycle where white vigilantes feel justified in menacing and physically attacking racial justice protesters and inspire others to do the same. Oh yeah, come on. I remember during the actual election, an older white guy, I mean, he's walking down, he must be like in his 70s, maybe 80. He's got a red MAGA cap on and he's just walking down the street and he was being attacked. That doesn't bother her. That's okay. They're just riding the ship, making sure that these Trump supporters understand what they're doing is terrible and evil. Now, I'm not a Trump supporter, but when I saw that, I thought, oh, come on, this ain't cool. I mean, ridiculous. He's wearing his cap. He has a certain political message he's trying to convey. It's a free country. There's no reason to attack him. The role of video. Research on social movements has long focused on the ways that media mobilizes people to take direct action. Audio and video clips from protests can evoke an emotional and visceral reaction in those who see them. Yeah, of course. Over the last decade, we've seen this emerge most often with calls for racial and economic justice. This past summer, the recorded murder of George Floyd, keep in mind, this article was written before the conviction, and therefore, again, she has him pegged for murder. Evidence be damned. Now, I'm not saying he was a murderer or not. I don't get into the George Floyd thing. I'm not going to even comment on it. But whatever the case, before the trial, you can't call him a murderer because he hasn't been convicted of it yet. Just one in a seemingly endless line of merciless and vicious events perpetrated by police against Black people. Oh, this is where it gets good. From Selma to Mike Brown, remember that name, from Rodney King to Sandra Bland and Jacob Blake, motivated millions of people worldwide to protest against police brutality. Now, let's talk about this. She's saying merciless and vicious events perpetrated by police against Black people. And she's got Mike Brown in there. Mike Brown was not a victim. Mike Brown got shot by a police officer because he was being a stupid ass. The whole narrative that Mike Brown had his hands up and was surrendering and then was shot did not hold up under scrutiny. Joan Donovan believes it, but it's not true. There were some witnesses that claimed that's what happened, but when the grand jury came around, they retracted their testimony. Or they didn't show up. And the reason is very clear. They lied. We know what happened with the Mike Brown deal. Mike Brown attacked the officer because he was stoned. He's a huge kid. He clearly attacked the police officer, rushed towards the police officer, and the officer opened fire on him. It wasn't merciless and vicious. It was self-defense. And guess what? The grand jury refused to even prosecute him for it. Well, they refused to recommend a prosecution. Why? The evidence didn't support the BLM narrative, and that was that the officer somehow murdered Mike Brown. Didn't happen. Those who disagree have not read the grand jury report. It's very clear. The officer acted in self-defense. And she goes on, from Rodney King to Sandra Bland. Sandra Bland was arrested for noncompliance. I don't think that the officer acted appropriately in that case. I thought he was a little bit of a hothead. He could have handled it better, but he didn't kill her. She didn't comply with his commands, and so he arrested her. And in jail, she committed suicide. I know some of you are thinking, suicide? You falling for that suicide excuse? Yeah, because it's true. She committed suicide, guys. There was no way that anybody could have got into that cell and killed her and got away with it. And so if you look at the evidence, it's clear what happened. She committed suicide. It's unfortunate, and yeah, I think the police are to blame for some of what happened there. I think the officer overreacted in arresting her, but it wasn't a merciless and vicious attack on her. He just arrested her and took her to jail. Jacob Blake? Are you kidding me? Again, Joan Donovan is under the impression that Jacob Blake was unarmed, just simply trying to get in his car, and the police shot him. That's not what happened. We all know what happened. The police tried to arrest him. He got into a fight with them. They tased him twice. He pulled the prongs out and then got into a car while carrying a knife. And the officer shot him. The officer claimed self-defense. And guess what? Even Mike Gravely, who is on the left-hand side of the spectrum, the district attorney for Kenosha County, said, yeah, there's no way that we can convict him for this. The evidence for self-defense is too strong. Furthermore, Jacob Blake was a fleeing felon, armed, getting into a car with kids. There was justification for the shooting. And that's why he was never charged. And so if you look at the instances that she lists here, Selma, we're not going to argue against that. Terrible thing that happened there. We agree. Of course, that was, 50 years ago. Mike Brown, nope, that was not a good example. Rodney King, okay, we'll give her that one. Sandra Bland, nope. And Jacob Blake, nope. Okay, so we read on. It isn't just racial justice protests that benefit from the outrage caused by video. In September 2011, very few people cared about Occupy Wall Street, and I'm not going to read this. It's boring. I'll post a link below, and you can read it if you want. We're going to skip down. And visuals can be just as motivating for the right wing. Recently, perhaps even more so. Now, keep in mind, everything that she has done here is projected the reaction by the left wing as a very positive thing, peaceful, the American way. And now she's going to talk about how the right wing reacts to it. And of course, everything they do is evil. Because right wing reactionaries do not have the same kind of experience in organizing street protests as the left. They instead rely heavily on social media, particularly Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter, to mobilize crowds. Oh, those bastards. They're using social media to do this. This is so wrong. As if the left doesn't use social media to organize rallies and stuff. No, not according to Joan Donovan. I mean, the whole idea of taking like these little posters and stapling them to the telephone poles as a way of organizing, yeah, they probably still do some of that, but let's face it, the left uses social media primarily to organize these protests. Don't think for a moment that that's not the case. Their efforts to counter the wave of public support for Black Lives Matter protests have made extensive use of this tactic. Oh, it's now a tactic. Okay. The negative connotation of that word is very striking here. As a scholar of social movements and media studies, she's a scholar. Well, excuse me. I didn't know we were dealing with a scholar here. Well, we should just put down our analysis here. I mean, there's no point in even trying to counter anything she's saying. She's a scholar. I see an alarming split between the types of content consumed by right-wing reactionaries and left-wing social justice advocates. Now, keep in mind, here's how she's framing it. Members of the right wing are called reactionaries. Those from the left wing are social justice advocates. Gee, I wonder if this article is a little biased. Given the way the media accounts shape public perceptions about protest and define who has the recourse to the legitimate use of violence, The kinds of content shared within these hyper-partisan media systems play a powerful yet often invisible role in mobilizing white vigilante groups. If social media companies do not act swiftly to stop calls for violence against protesters, the situation can only get worse. Okay, so she's making it clear here. We have a battle between the right wing and the left wing. We all know that. Everybody agrees. Okay, the left wing is going up against the right wing. And what is she doing? She's calling on social media companies to act swiftly to stop the right wing. The left wing is okay. I mean, if you want to organize an Antifa pro-Stalin beat-a-thon where you guys go roam the streets and beat up on anybody you think supports capitalism, that's okay with her. That's just acting for social justice. The rise of riot porn. Since the George Floyd protests, conservative media outlets, including Fox News, particularly Tucker Carlson and Sean Hannity, One America News, Glenn Beck's Blaze TV, and right-wing YouTubers, have been covering Black Lives Matter and other left-wing protests daily. Yeah, of course, those are called newsworthy items. Why wouldn't they cover them? Specifically highlighting instances of violence, fighting, and property damage, of course, because guess what? That's what people are interested in watching. This coverage has come to dominate the right-wing narrative in a new way, flipping the script to suggest that black protesters, okay, keep in mind, she's talking about protesters in black only, demonstrating because they fear police violence, are themselves a threat to white people. No, I'm really disgusted at her in this case. Here, she's claiming that BLM and Antifa demonstrations are all about black people protesting. No, most of the people at these demonstrations are not black. They're white. And they're not just protesting. Some of them are rioting. Some of them are doing property damage. And she might come back and say, well, that's only a small percentage. But if you look at the right wing, when they show up in these communities, not all of them are beating up people. In fact, I would suggest that the actual violence is caused by a very small minority. So why doesn't she also acknowledge the fact that BLM and Antifa do have a certain segment of their populations that like to get involved in fracases? Mainstream media bias toward covering violence and protests is well studied, best encapsulated by the saying, if it bleeds, it leads. Most protests are largely peaceful. Oh, okay. But citizens gather, grieve, and leave is no story at all. This directs a disproportionate amount of attention across the entire media ecosystem to violent protesters. Of course, that's true. I'm sure the right gets that as well. When the right wing shows up and they beat up somebody, guess what? It makes the news. Now, with social media as a broadcast system, the right-wing media has upped the ante. So what she's really pissed off about is that in the past, all of the right-wing stuff, the right-wing violence would get lots of attention on mainstream media outlets like CNN and MSN. But now, violence committed by the left gets exposed as well. And it's this damn social media that's causing the problem. If only we could just monopolize the message to only produce pro-left messages, then we'd be living in utopia. And it's that damn social media that come along that allows people to take video recordings of violence perpetrated by the left and actually get them posted online and go viral. That's what she's complaining about. According to analysis I conducted using Media Cloud, a research tool from MIT and Harvard, I'm not sure why it's important to mention the name of the tool, but okay. Right-wing media outlets wrote 5 to 6 times more articles about Seattle's Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone than did center or left media. And what is she considering center? And is this really surprising? The Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone was a dumpster fire. It was a clown show. We all saw it. And what did it do? It sort of affirmed to the nation what happens when the left takes over a small chunk of a city and tries to implement, let's say, Marxist, socialist ideals. And of course, it failed. And she's pissed off that right-wing media outlets wrote a lot about it, but of course they're going to. Why wouldn't they? If the right roped off a certain part of, I don't know, Tulsa, and try to implement some sort of right-wing government thing and it failed, you don't think that CNN and MSN and all those wouldn't be covering it 24/7? Of course they would. It's only natural that a right-wing media outlet is going to focus a lot of its coverage on failures of the left. That's human nature. The best way to stop that problem is don't create Chaz zones. If this embarrassed you, and if you really, really recoil at the thought of seeing media stories about the Chaz zone, then don't create the Chaz zone. What has been a minor storyline among left-wing audiences, right, in other words, it's a minor storyline because they didn't want to hear it. This was embarrassing. It's a left-wing utopia, and it failed miserably. It's embarrassing, and so, yeah, it was a minor storyline. But it wasn't a minor storyline because it was minor. This was actually a big deal. It was a group of people who cordoned off a part of a city, prevented police from going in, prevented normal services from going in. This is a big deal. It's almost insurrection level. In a sense, it's an insurrection against the city government. And it should not have been a minor storyline at all. So what has been a minor storyline among left-wing audiences has been dramatically overemphasized by right-wing media because these protests provided plenty of visceral content for online content creators. Absolutely. The best way to cure this, don't create the content for them. In one case, Fox News manipulated photos to make protesters appear more ominous and threatening, while other right-wing outlets falsely reported that the occupying protesters were extorting local businesses. Oh my God. Fox News manipulated a photo to make the left look bad. Gee, where have we seen that kind of thing before? Oh yeah, Katie Couric, her little documentary where they put in silence to make it look like a bunch of right-wing gun owners were stumped, which is pure fraud. But you won't find Joan Donovan complaining about that. A lot of people will say, well, that's not the media. Yes, it is. Katie Couric, it's a documentary that they produced. That's media. It wasn't meant for entertainment. While other right-wing outlets falsely reported that the occupying protesters were extorting local businesses. Well, I don't know about the extortion part, but local businesses actually sued the city because they were harassed and targeted. So there must have been something bad going on there. But in Joan Donovan's world, you would not report that. That would be suppressed. And I want to make sure everybody sees that the word suppression here is all what this is about. She wants to suppress any kind of negative news about the left. And she's upset that social media allows those messages to get out. There's another term for it. I think it's called censorship. Yeah. These narratives have been intensified and supplemented by the work of right-wing adversarial media makers like Elijah Schaffer and Andy Ngo, who are not here are the horrible things that they do, who collect videos of conflict at public protests and recirculate them to their online audiences. Oh my God. They show up at these protests and they see terrible things happening and they videotape them and they post them online for others to see. Can you imagine? What's journalism come to? Both have even gone undercover. Oh, this is really terrible. Oh my God, you can't believe the kind of journalistic tactics they're using now. Both have even gone undercover by posing as protesters to capture footage for their channels, seeking to name and shame those marching. Gee, journalists have never done that before. Their videos are edited, decontextualized, and shared among audiences hungry for a new fix of riot porn, which instantly goes viral across the right-wing media ecosystem with the aid of influential pundits and politicians, including, oh my God, President Donald Trump. She got Trump in there. That's one thing. If you're writing for these journals and stuff, you got to get the word Trump in there. The footage has a hypnotic, almost ballet quality, designed to influence and overwhelm the sense-making capacity of watchers consuming it from a safe distance online. Oh, here we go. Riot porn is different from videos of abuse and violence carried out by the police. Oh, yeah, it's so different. And we should not confuse one for the other. In the recording of the George Floyd murder, the video mobilized hundreds of thousands of people outraged that Floyd's killer had not been arrested. With riot porn, what moves someone from watching to showing up is the potential for participating in a violent altercation, because left-wing protests never produce violent altercations. The people who show up at these BLM protests never want to go there to cause any kind of harm or damage. No, it's only the right wing that does this. And that's the reason why making videotaping police doing something wrong and making it go viral is somehow different from videotaping riot abuse and making it go viral. The motivating factor is the hope to live out fantasies of taking justice into their own hands, a la Dirty Harry, the film series about a rogue cop who shirks protocol and murders at will. Judging by the reactions shared by followers of right-wing influencers, riot porn further enrages and traumatizes these audiences from afar. Yeah, videotapes of police brutality don't do that. No, never. Inflaming their perceptions of risk and danger. What about perceptions of risk and danger about the police? Has that become an issue? Has the black community not become fearful of cops and consider them aggressors who brutalize them based on this police brutality porn? These emotional reactions help develop an unshakable trust between the partisan content creators and the content consumers. There's a trust between them. That's what a good reporter does. And for the sake of brevity, I'm going to skip over the McCloskeys here. You can read it if you want. The problem isn't simply that riot porn exists, or that people with divergent opinions can interpret videos differently depending on their social media feeds. And it's not just that social media platforms don't know what to do with white vigilante organizing, although they clearly don't. Facebook's attempt to limit the spread of propaganda about Kyle Rittenhouse by blocking searches on his name is a drastic solution to a problem of its own making. Okay, here you go. Facebook was blocking searches of Kyle Rittenhouse. So exactly what does that do? Well, this is called censorship. You're not limiting the spread of propaganda. You're preventing people from accessing information because it might be harmful in your eyes. Facebook took no action on 455 flags marked by the Kenosha Guards event page as potentially dangerous. Oh, get this is great. Memes in support of Rittenhouse and calls for armed MAGA rallies are on the rise. Oh my God, there are memes out there that support Kyle Rittenhouse. In other words, there are memes out there that think Kyle Rittenhouse is not guilty, and we can't have that. What we need is to suppress that. That's Joan Donovan's view. We need some way that any support for Kyle Rittenhouse is suppressed so that we can convict him. That's what she wants. She wants a conviction. And she feels that people talking about Kyle and supporting him and spreading information, evidence that they may have uncovered, legal analysis that might not be favorable to Binger, those things might prevent us from convicting Kyle, and therefore we must suppress it. I mean, think about this. You all know my dumb argument series, right? I have about 65 in there now. Almost all of them highlight dumb arguments proffered by the left. If she had her way, do you think that Joan Donovan would have those removed? Of course she would. In fact, she would advocate for taking down my channel. I do a lot of legal analysis. Yeah, it's amateurish, but I try. But this legal analysis typically works in Kyle's favor. And she would absolutely love it if YouTube took it down. That's what she's fighting for. That's what she wants. The real difficulty is that competing accounts circulate in parallel universes that are not even close to balanced in their reach. Oh, this is good. Catch this. Kevin Roos of the New York Times pointed out that the majority of people on Facebook are witnessing a radically different narrative from the one presented to consumers of mainstream media. So she's pissed off because the message given out by mainstream media is not the one that's dominating, that there is an alternative source of information, takes, opinions that diverges from mainstream media. In August, he tweeted, CNN saw 21 million Facebook interactions. The right-wing commentator Ben Shapiro gathered 55 million. And so this is what's upsetting her. Why should Ben Shapiro have a larger reach than CNN? She thinks that CNN should dominate the airwaves or the internet. And she's upset that Ben Shapiro can actually gain a lot of followers by presenting an alternative message. This doesn't mean there's a silent majority of right-wing media consumers. In fact, it means that the right-wing media ecosystem continues to be dense and insular, which makes the propaganda feedback loop much more effective at shaping audience perceptions and worldviews. She doesn't want to admit that there is this silent majority. She doesn't want to admit that the 55 million people indicates that there's a large number of people out there who might not share her view. She needs this 55 million to come from a very small number, a small subset of people with extremist views. And so she's making a claim here. That doesn't mean that there's this silent majority out there. No. It just means that these 55 million people are able to get their number of interactions up to ridiculous levels through some unfair system, this feedback loop or something like that. Harvard researchers, oh God, have described this effect in their study, Networked Propaganda. I'm not even going to bother with that drivel. I'll skip down a little bit. You could read the entire article if you want. The last paragraph is rather interesting. By using riot porn to incite fear in white people, the right-wing media ecosystem converts the real pain experienced by Black Americans into fodder for deranged, paranoid fantasies that white vigilantes must take up the functions of the police. Social media companies need to work actively to prevent militias and vigilante groups from staging these armed standoffs. This includes shutting down event pages that are used as central organizing hubs and removing the accounts of those who are calling for physical violence. What played out in Portland and Kenosha this week is another confirmation that racial terror is real and getting worse. Okay, so now she's kind of backtracking a little bit. You may be wondering, what's she doing with this final paragraph? She has spent the entire article basically advocating censorship, suppression. Anybody that has a right-wing take on things, they should have their voice suppressed. That's her view. If the right has a channel for getting their message out that prevents CNN and MSN from monopolizing the media coverage of some event, that's a problem for her. But she's advocating censorship. I mean, she's basically coming out and saying it, but she doesn't want to. So in this final paragraph, she's going to take a very neutral stand. All of a sudden, she only wants to shut down pages that are used as central organizing hubs and removing accounts who are calling for physical violence. Okay, so she's saying, now, I'm not really in favor of censorship. I'm only talking about messages that call for physical violence. But her entire narrative here isn't about that. Ben Shapiro, as far as I know, never called for physical violence. And yet she's crying that he has 55 million interactions versus CNN's 21 million. So her message isn't just aimed at calls for physical violence. Her message is to suppress the right-wing viewpoint on these police brutality events. Okay, take a look at this one. Social media companies need to work actively to prevent militias and vigilante groups from staging these armed standoffs, okay? And so now she's also claiming, well, now I'm only talking about the use of social media when they stage these armed standoffs. That's not true. If you read her article, it's all about suppressing the right-wing viewpoint. And this is all about ending your article by saying, now, I'm not advocating for blah, blah, blah that everybody does, right? We have a person who's going on and claiming all kinds of horrific stuff. But in the end, what do they say? Now, I'm not calling for such and such. That's what she's doing in this final paragraph. Okay, so I'll take a few more minutes. I'd like to get to know Joan Donovan a little bit more. If you look at a profile, she teaches a graduate course called Media Manipulation and Disinformation Campaigns. That doesn't really sound like a graduate course, but okay. Look at her expertise. Now, if I put down my expertise on a CV, it would probably be something like Numerov analysis of quantum systems or something. Very focused, something that I have done a lot of work in, something I know like the back of my hand. Look what she lists: media, health, human rights, social policy, fairness and justice, business and regulation. Jeez. Democracy and governance. Is there anything that she doesn't have listed? Gender, race, and identity. Science, technology, and data. Advocacy and social movements. International relations and security. Holy cow. Real scholar. Yeah, how would you like to have to go to a dinner and listen to this person talk for any length of time? Okay, so here is DPI 622, the graduate level course she teaches, and you may be wondering, well, why don't I consider this graduate level? Listen to this. Throughout this course, students will learn how to define a manipulation campaign, to spot when a manipulation is likely to occur, what types of wedge issues are most likely to be manipulated, current strategies employed by key stakeholders to combat media manipulation. This course addresses how social movements, political parties, governments, corporations, and other network groups, including professional disinformation operators, engage in active efforts to control public conversation, derail democracy, and disrupt society. I don't even see prerequisites, and I can't even imagine what the prerequisites would be. This is a graduate level course? Blow off city. Okay, so let's just go ahead and hear from her. At least we'll get to see what she sounds like. Here we go.
Today, deplatforming is the most popular tactic to deal with extremist content online. But does it actually work?
It's not necessarily going to create a causal chain where we get rid of hate online. But what it does do is it disrupts this community of people that have been building over the last 5 years a culture of harm and harassment and incitement.
So let me ask, what about Kyle Rittenhouse? Remember, Kyle set up a webpage to collect funds so that he could pay for his defense. And it got deplatformed. And so he tried another one and it got deplatformed. And these tech companies were deplatforming him because of people like Joan Donovan. How do you think she feels about a 17-year-old kid trying to raise money for his defense? She absolutely would have led the charge to have Kyle deplatformed. Because in her mind, Kyle is guilty. He's a murderer. And this whole innocent until proven guilty and the right of the accused to defend themselves in court is anathema to her ilk. So while she may be projecting this image that, well, now deplatforming, we're only going after the real violent ones. No, they deplatformed Kyle. They tried to take away his right to defend himself in court adequately. Now keep in mind, Crystal Kaiser would be completely different. Crystal Kaiser is a young black female that has been accused of murder. The evidence that she committed murder is fairly strong, actually. Joan Donovan would have no problem supporting Crystal Kaiser's webpage to raise money for her defense, would have no trouble at all. But not Kyle. And the reason is obvious. She projects Kyle as a right-winger, and the right has no right to a voice in her world. In the next video, I'm going to focus on her choice of Robin Thomas. Like my video, subscribe to my channel.